a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to him, even though he's no longer there. I have some notes, and I wrote a eulogy, and Rabbi Renee kind of went through some points on that. So I decided to just stick with like my happiest memories of my dad and all the crazy things he did. So I'll start off by saying that my dad was one of my closest friends my whole life, and that is very true. And those of you who know me know that that is the truth. And when I was driving up here today, I even thought about this yellow notepad, because my dad was a draftsman, and he had notepads all over the house, yellow notepads, not white, yellow. And when I became a teacher, this is all I use for my notes. And it's just, he is very much in me. He's very much a part of me, even down to this small detail. I think Arcadia just buys these for me in the English department, and I go through like 20 packs a semester. My dad was a really gentle person. He never had a bad thing to say about anybody, like really, and he was always really encouraging of me. I remember he always used to say, like, no matter what it is. When I was a kid, he was like, don't worry, you're gonna land on your feet, like, you're gonna be fine. And then as an adult, he would say, you always land on your feet. You're gonna be fine. He never missed a first day of anything, whether I was in school or teaching school. I mean, sometimes I would forget. I'd be like, oh shit, I start school tomorrow. But like, he would call and be like, good luck, honey. He always remembered. He had a weird thing with dates. I know you guys know that. Like, he would always be like, October 23rd, 1965 was the day this movie came out. I'm like, how do you even remember that? Like, you don't know that. And you know what? Sometimes I would look it up. He was always right. Like, he had this thing with dates. He loved me and my sister. He lost his father when he was really young. And he always said all throughout my life that I wanted to be your father. I wanted to make sure that you had a father. And I wanted to be there for you. And he was. I mean, there were fun times at Dad's house on the weekends, after my parents got divorced. And we were always messing around. Dinner was especially something that was, you'll hear.
Food throwing.
Oh yeah. Well, I was a little bit of a prissier kid than my sister was. And my dad and my sister used to pretend that they put something in my food all the time. And I would get and I would throw it out, and they would just be like looking at each other, and I was like, what did you put in my food? And then the green beans. We love green. My sister and my dad called them green beans, and they used to throw them back and forth. And my dad always had us set the table. Always. We could never eat dinner without the knife and the fork in the right place. And my sister and my father used to act out scenes from Abbott and Costello all the time. There was a lot of dinner scenes in Abbott and Costello movies, and there was, in particular, like, the meat's on fire, and my sister would very often throw water on my food. Like, it was a wild time. Those of you who know my dad, you know how much he loved animals. You know how much he loved his dogs. I mean, I grew up with a pack. And my dad told a lot of stories, and he told them many, many times. And I'm sure many of you have heard this story before about the biggest hamster. We had a hamster that passed away when I was about 10, and we went to the pet store to pick up the hamster. And we left with a German Shepherd Husky mix that we named Cookie. My sister named him Cookie because he looked like a chocolate chip cookie without the chocolate chips. And then 2 years later, we got another dog named Coco. And together, I think they had 24 pups, 3 litters. We named all of them, and that was one of my greatest memories, was having those puppies and just kind of just going over on the weekends and just taking care of them. And a lot of them, especially in the first litter, moved into like houses in the neighborhood. So we got to see all these dogs grow up. Movies. Rabbi Renee mentioned the movies. I told a few of you. What? Well, yeah, she said, okay, so she said he loved the films of David Lean. My dad would be so angry that she didn't say David Lean correctly, because that was his favorite director, and that's not okay. But she did a great job otherwise. I don't mean to say anything bad about that. My dad loved his movies. He loved sound systems and he loved music. And in his living room, he always had hundreds and hundreds of movies alphabetized. Yeah, you remember this. Yeah, you remember, Steve. And they were all like hundreds of VHSs. Like the whole living room was lined with shelves. And if I wanted to watch a movie and it was taken out of order, he'd walk in the living room and be like, Trace? Like where? And like the B's and the C section. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like it was just like when he would get so like crazy about it. When surround sound came out for home theaters in the early 90s, there were 2 tests of whether it worked or not for my dad. It was the chariot scene from Ben-Hur and the scene in Die Hard where Bruce Willis throws the computer down the elevator shaft and the whole Nakatomi building blows up. And I remember distinctly being a child and being outside and all the way down the block and hearing a giant explosion. And everybody coming out onto the steps and being like, what? And we were so embarrassed. And, you know, and he was like, it works, hon, it's great. And he used to call us Big Nucks, Little Nucks. He loved movie soundtracks. That's a part of what I put on the soundtrack today, all of his favorite songs. We always listened to them when we ate dinner, and he used to quiz us. He'd be like, who's this? Is it Elmer Bernstein? Is it Miklos Froja? Is it, you know, I'm forgetting all their names. Movies Unlimited, we always went. Remember video stores? Remember those? I miss video stores so badly. Every Friday when my dad would pick us up for the weekend, that was like one of our first stops. We would go to Movies Unlimited and get like 20 movies. Yeah, and he would let us pick what we wanted, and then he would pick things for us. He always taught us about films. I mean, Charlton Heston, Paul Newman, they were like our uncles. Like, you know, like, he spoke about them like they were our relatives. Like I knew more about them than I knew about a lot of people in the world. I have to thank my dad for that, for my love of film, my love of storytelling. I'm a professor now, and I have a degree in creative writing, and I mostly teach creative writing, but I teach a screenwriting class. And, you know, it occurs to me all the time when I'm sitting there teaching my screenwriting class that I'm doing the same exact thing my dad did to us when we were kids, only I get paid for it. and how lucky I am, you know, to have that. And that's all because of him. I'm going to tell 2 film stories. I know this is getting a little long, but there are a lot of memories. He took us to the movies all the time, and one of the times I was in the 5th grade at St. Matthew's School, and his mother, my bubby, was very sick. And it's the afternoon, right after recess, and somebody comes down to the office and says or to my classroom and says you have to go to the office. And then my sister got, and I thought Bubby died. She didn't die though. But the whole time we're walking down there, I was like, you know, telling my sister, I'm like, this might be bad, this might be. And then we got down to the office, and the principal said, you have a dentist appointment. And I'm like, and we get outside, and my dad goes, kids, we're going to see Under Siege. A Steven Seagal movie. I know, my mom was not too happy about this, but he used to get us out of school a lot to go to the movies.
And I was the term.
We went to see Spartacus, which was one of my favorite movies, but we saw it when it was re-released. And I just remember that experience with my dad, and all of us, me, my sister, and my father, were all crying. But it was a really beautiful moment, and he wanted to share that with us, and I'll never forget that. I want to say that, you know, he had so many friends. He loved his family so much. He talked about you folks very, very often. I haven't seen you in a very long time. But he talked about you quite often, all the shenanigans, all the fun stuff, and I hope to hear some of it, please. His AA community, you folks have been there for him the last 20 years, and he loved you all so very much. He loved Abby, his current doggie, his dachshund, who's now living with me and Shane. And she's living a good doggy life. She's got her own bed. She is, you know, as Shane would put it, 2 hots in a cot.
She slimmed down too.
She slimmed down. She has like fancy doggy outfits because I do that too. I just want to say that I know that my dad struggled a lot in his life, and so many of you in this room have helped him. And I'm gonna thank you because I know that he would have wanted me to say that too. And I know that there's so much love in this room. And I don't know how I'm gonna live without him. It's so hard just not to be able to pick up that phone and to not have him here. And I know this is a part of life, but I'll find a way. And I'm gonna open it up now. At the end of the eulogizing, my dad said at one point that he wanted me to play one song at his funeral, and it's Sweet Judy Blue Eyes by Crosby, Stills and Nash.
It's a beautiful.
So I want to just sit here in silence after we're done the eulogizing and listen to that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
For people who don't know me, I'm Kathy Greenhoff. And
Louder,
louder.
please.
Oh, louder. I'm Kathy Greenhoff, Marshall's ex-wife, and just for those who didn't know. Before I get off on this, I want to give a big shout out to Tracy, my love, for doing so much work for Daddy's funeral. Very thoughtful and so loving for every detail of your father, music included, everything. This is not easy for her, as you know, and she did it with grace and dignity. And I love you so much, Tracy. From the moment we first met, and I'm going back maybe 1973, we were connected right away. We knew we would be together forever. And then the inevitable came, because we knew it was going to happen. May 3rd, 1975, we got married. And we had a very good marriage for 14 years. And two beautiful daughters, Tracy and Jessie, which were everything to us. Marshall had so many wonderful qualities when we met. He was handsome. He was funny. He was artistic. He was smart. Like dates, you're talking about dates? I was like, what date is that? He would know right away. Kind, well-read. He would read constantly. Thoughtful and kind. Our marriage was very good until it wasn't. Addiction is a terrible disease, and one he could not overcome. And topping that off with the death of our Jessie, it crushed me and him beyond. And I put this to Tracy. I never heard him say an unkind word about anybody, whatever they did to him. About his family, friends, people in his life, even when he was rejected by some. Marshall, Stephen, Levine, always remember that you were loved by your family. We will always remember you. Rest in peace, Marshall. All your worries are gone now. You're with our Jessie, and you're loved beyond anybody, and you're with your Charlie, your father too, your beloved Charlie. Rest in peace.
But cousins, I can't begin to tell you. They would chase my sisters and I around, but one of the things that I remember most about Marshall is that his mother and father had a store in North Philadelphia, and he would stay at our house on Saturdays or Sundays and wait for his parents to come pick him up. And I had to go to bed before him, and I was older, and I was not happy. And whenever I saw him, he kept reminding me of that. We were so happy when he married you, Kath, and we were thrilled to have both of your girls at our house as long as we could. And I have to tell you that this is quite a wonderful memorial to a really wonderful man.
What's your name? Oh yeah, I'm Steve. Met Marshall about 20 years ago, and I have I think some funny stuff. He would make fun of me, but he always told me about it. It's not like sneaking behind somebody's back. So he was in an AA meeting, and I'm on the nervous side and the hyper side, but I was much, much, much worse 20 years ago. And he saw me walk in the meeting, and he described me as danger, Will Robinson, danger. He just reminds me of funny stuff. We went to the movies once and saw there's kids here, so I'm going to have to spell. We saw Gangs of New York, and there was some scene where I think it was Daniel Day-Lewis, somehow betrayed somebody, and I yelled out, "You, B-A-S-T-A-R-D," and he always reminds me of that. He said I yelled it loud enough for the whole movie theater to hear it. I remember saying it. He also was a great storyteller, but there was one thing he always said. If he ever heard something that was funny, he always said they were laughing so hard, tears were streaming out of their eyes. He always used to say that. He used to say that he was the hardest person in the world to get along with, but with all these 80% glowing remarks, I feel bad saying that, but he would say that to me a lot. First impressions were big on him. If he didn't like in the beginning, that would... Anyway, he met Allen Iverson in one of his elevators where he lived, and he loved him. And he met Bruce Springsteen, and for some reason they didn't get along, and he does not like Bruce Springsteen. But and this is kind of repetitive, but the movies, kind of like Tracy said, he would know the date, the lead actor, the lead actress, the director's name, the producer's name, even the music, who wrote the musical score. And I used to know how to get to him. The classics like Ben-Hur and Spartacus, I used to say, oh, Showgirls was much better than that. Much better than El Cid. And music, I know Crosby, Stills and Nash, but to me, he mentioned the Beatles the most. So if I heard electronic music or rap music, I would say to him, oh, this is much better than the Beatles. And a show that brought us together is crazy. I wanted to say I miss calling him. I sometimes want to call him, and there's a few episodes which I won't go into of 2.5 Men and The Big Bang Theory, and I want to call him to say, oh, this episode's one I just forgot that he's gone. So that's sad. The animal thing was amazing. He had two cats and Abigail. And then he had the brilliant idea of getting another cat. And I don't know much about animals. I know he's great with them. If he had a raccoon or a possum, I think they would be great pets. He would make them great pets. But, so I said, I don't think it's a good idea to bring another cat into your home. This is when he had, like I said, he already had the 2 cats and Abigail. And this cat was named Sophie, and within 10 or 15 minutes, they were best friends. It was unbelievable. So I was wrong about that. There was one thing I thought he was playing a joke all the time. I'm not cutting him up here, but when he had the hiccups, it wasn't normal. He went,
Oh my God, his hiccups are the worst.
yeah.
He sounded like he was dying.
I know.
It was like,
I didn't mean that. It was,
No,
at the time, it was funny. At the time, it was funny. And then I went to Haverford High, and somehow I got into Lower Merion basketball. I went to one of their games, and I just fell in love with them. That's where Kobe Bryant went. I still root for Haverford. Anyway, I would send him a note that said, "Let's go Aces," and that would annoy him, so he would change the name Aces to something else, which I can't spell. And finally, I haven't seen him much during this COVID-19 period. So I would call him on the phone, and he would put Abby, still my favorite dog, and his Abby on the phone, and I would say to Abigail, Marshall was on the other line, holding Abigail to the phone, and I would go, Abigail, 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 Abigail. And Marshall would say she's licking the phone. I have many good memories. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Steve.
Oh, good.
So I'm Marshall's cousin, Michael Quint. His mother, my mother, were sisters. And I met Marshall when I was very, very young. When my mom was sick, I stayed with Aunt Claire and Marshall in Philadelphia. And so there's pictures of us, and I'll try to find some of us, in a little swimming pool on Fayette Street. And I got to know Uncle Charlie before he died. And Uncle Charlie would come home to Fayette Street, and he would have very curly hair.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him, "How did you get that curly hair?" And he looked up from his meal and he said, "I get a permanent." Well, I was about 5 or 6. I went, okay. And when I was young, and my father was in the Army, we would be gone for long periods of time. But for ages about 5 to 10, we lived in Frederick, Maryland on a Army base there, Fort Detrick. And it's a very small base with a very little movie theater. So we would go see movies there when I lived there. But the big thing for myself and my brother is that when we would go to Philadelphia, this big town, so many people, Marshall would take us to these unbelievable movie theaters downtown. I don't remember what street, but they're very elaborate. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And we saw El Cid and Terrace Bulba, which we called Terrace Bubala, and probably Ben-Hur. But we would see these unbelievable films in these incredible theaters. But that was my experience of seeing movies, you know, coming from this little tiny movie theater in Frederick. Always loved going to see Marshall. You know, my young cousin, he always had a dog or, you know, some animal that we got to play with. And later when we moved to Alexandria, Virginia, we got one of his, one of the offspring, a little mixed poodle and something else, which we had for 14 years, named Pierre. Another experience that I had, I didn't tell you about, is that Aunt Claire took my brother, myself, and Marshall fishing in one of these unpronounceable rivers in Philadelphia. You guys don't have
Schuylkill.
Yeah, Schuylkill. It's not, you don't have like Red River or it's all these complicated names.
Wissahickon.
Yeah, Wissahickon. Yeah. So I can remember what river it was. But so we went fishing, and for bait, Aunt Claire said, you know, tomatoes go very well with fish. So we used tomatoes. I mean, she did take us fishing. It wasn't the right bait, but that's what I remember. We didn't catch anything. But we tried tomatoes. I had a feeling it should be like bugs or worms, but I didn't want to offend her. We would always seem to get in some kind of trouble, no matter what we did in the house. I remember one time we were in his parents' bedroom, and we were having a pillow fight. And of course, there was this really long pillow at the top of the bed. So we were taking that and hitting each other, and we broke the lamp up above the ceiling. You know, we were trying to figure out how to get it back, or hopefully nobody would notice. But that was one of the things that happened. I was in the retail business, and there was a store in Maryland that we redid, and Marshall came down and helped me for a few days. It was in 1991. I don't know if you knew that, but he came down and helped me just get it organized and painting it. But he was down for a few days and he did that. It was always, you know, we just had a lot of fun as, you know, I was introduced to Tarzan by Marshall. He didn't just have, there were no VHS movies back then, but he would have movie film of the favorite scenes on Tarzan, and I always thought, well, he gets to do these neatest things that I don't, you know, that I didn't get to do, being in Philadelphia. But I was kind of like a country bumpkin, you know, coming to Philadelphia. But I loved being in his neighborhood on Fayette Street. In the neighborhood was called
Mount Airy.
Mount Airy, yeah, Mount Airy, and we would make, yeah. So we would walk. Oh, you're right, maybe my age. Okay, I forgot. So we'd walk up the street and go to the main, where all the stores were. I mean, there was nothing like that in Frederick. And we would go in and buy some stuff and then walk back. But I just had a great time in my childhood with Marshall. And anyway, I'll share some more memories later. I think I've taken enough time, but thanks. I really love what you said about Marshall, and he was very kind. You know about him wrestling a gorilla, right?
Yeah.
Wrestle the gorilla or box the kangaroo, right?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I won't go into
No,
that.
the rest of us don't know that
Yeah,
story.
that's a great story.
Yeah, I was pregnant with her when.
Should I tell that real quick?
Yeah,
So-
Yeah.
Okay, so Marshall and another one of his friends, and his friends never had regular names. They always were like, church,
Church,
or
yeah.
I can't, nobody named John or Phil or Pete. They always had these unusual nicknames. But one time he went to a carnival with one of his friends, and outside you could, if you could stay in the ring with either a kangaroo or a gorilla for
You never heard this?
one round, you would get $10. Of course, you had to pay $1 to perhaps win 10. So his friend went in against the kangaroo and immediately had his lights punched out by it and fled the ring. And yeah, that's right. And then his friend said, "Don't go against the gorilla. Don't go." He says, "Oh, I'll be careful." And so he said, "No, don't do it. I'm telling you." So he gets in the ring, and there's the gorilla, and so Marshall's standing there, and then the gorilla came over and grabbed his arm like this, and so Marshall said, "I never felt anything so tight on my arm." I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, I punched the gorilla." I said, "Probably not the best choice at the time." And that's when the gorilla literally picked him up upside down and I think threw him down. And then the trainers came and saved him. But he would do crazy stuff like that. Anyway, anyway, Tracy, I just have great memories of him.
One of the hardest things to do.
Can't hear you.
One of the hardest things to do is to talk about someone that you've lost. I feel that, and I feel that for everyone in this room. My heart, my soul goes out to you. I met Marshall through Kathy in 1978.
77.
77. And one of the first things I did when I met Marshall was to insult him. Tragic mistake. The look on his face said, "You're going to pay for that forever." And that's what it was like. We would banter back and forth about everything. He said, "You are just so unattractive." I said, "You should look in the mirror." And this went on for, God, so many years.
How about with your date? Remember you came in and he said,
Oh yeah, he made fun of my date. I brought a date over one time. Now back in the 80s, for you that can remember, the big hairstyle was a perm. And I had
a
one,
fro.
a big fro. And he put a plant next to me saying, "Steve and his date." That was one of the mildest things. He stepped up his game. They used to live at Carriage Stop Apartments, not too far from here. And there was 2 levels. They lived in the upper level. So on the lower level was just basically like a foyer, okay? There was no lights. It was like an autumn night.
Yeah.
I'm coming over and I'm like knocking on the door and there's no answer. I'm like, oh God, they knew I was coming over. All of a sudden, Marshall jumps out of this dark spot with a knife in his hand, which I thought was a knife,
It was a fake name.
but it was a fake knife. And he screams and I go flying backwards. And the look on his face
He
of
was laughing
pure
his ass off.
joy.
Yeah.
Pure laughter. I said, "You can't say it."
I think he broke your glasses that much.
I think he did too. But he even upped his game one better. It was a 4th of July, and we always ordered out, every time. This was no exception.
I was not a cook.
So we go in my car, and back then there wasn't a power windows. Okay, it was all manual. he decides that he's gonna set off a firecracker from inside the car. So we're going along, the window's down, he sends it out, and before he can roll up the window, guess what? It's coming right back into the car. And we just cover our heads, and it was going everywhere, smoke everywhere. And I said, are you out of your mind? How could you be so dumb? And all he did was laugh. Didn't get stressed out, just laughed. We spent countless hours, like everybody said, watching movies. But one thing we thoroughly enjoyed was playing a game. What was it called?
Kismet?
No,
Gradius.
no, it wasn't Brad.
Yeah, it was Gradius.
Was it? I thought it was
It was
Kismet.
Gradius. You were always asleep.
Yeah.
She would say, I'm going to night, boys. Bye.
I'd throw blankets over the
Yeah,
afterwards.
and we would just stay
and
for
go to
hours
bed.
playing video games. You know, there's no words to express when you lose someone, but you have to really be glad in the experiences that you had with that person. And I can say, it was an experience. Thank you.
That's when I met Marshall 20 years ago. And he told me the worst story I ever heard in my life. The second worst story I ever heard in my life was October of 2004 when my daughter called and said that my grandson, who was almost 17, was killed in an automobile accident the previous night. Died instantly, obviously. So all of a sudden, I had another bond with Marshall. Because Marshall told me about his daughter Jessie when I first met him, early in our relationship, how she was accidentally shot at a party by one of the partygoers playing with her father's gun. Well, that changed Marshall for the rest of his life. That dramatic ending of his daughter totally changed him. And that's what, when you have bad feelings, some of us can handle it in a balanced way, and others look for an escape. So many of us, to escape, would drink to feel less, or drug to feel less. So he was in AA, along with me, and I had my problems, but I've been working them out. I'm on my third wife. Yes, that's funny. Third wife, I'm married 31 years. I have a son who's 31. And so Marshall and I were going to this weekly meeting together, and finally he asked me if I would be his sponsor. And a sponsor helps bring him through the steps of sobriety and lots of productive time investments. So that's how we started off. And there are so many stories. You have told so many stories tonight that I know of, by the way, almost all of them. And Tracy has done such a great job putting this together. And Kathy, I've known you for 20 years, occasionally met. So Marshall would, well, when I met Marshall, the only thing he had was the clothes on his back. He was living in a recovery house for men. And he would walk across the backyard into the place where we had the meeting on Monday nights. And then I'd pick him up for other meetings for Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, etc. So all of a sudden, he started to grow, and he got a job with SEPTA, saved his money, did a good job. Years later, he finally bought a dog. He always talked about, someday I'm gonna get a dog. Someday I'm gonna get a Dachshund. I'm gonna get a long-haired Dachshund, not a Dachshund, but a long-haired Dachshund. And that day finally came. And I drove him to pick up the dog.
I remember.
Drove him to have, 6 weeks later, we went out and had the dog neutered. And Marshall had a great sense of humor that was almost negative, but it wasn't. And he could insult anybody with a glance, was like my middle brother. My brother was like him, reminded me a lot of Brother Bob. So that's the worst parts of Marshall, but Marshall grew to be independent. He got a job, he found his own place to live. He always knew that he wanted to get a car, but he knew he had to pay off these thousands of dollars of parking tickets before he could get his license back, which never happened. So he was totally dependent on the bus system and his friends. But we saw each other every single week. Sometimes in the beginning of his relationship with AA, we were together 5 nights a week. Then a couple years later, it was 4 nights a week. A couple years later, it was 3 nights a week. And the last few years, it's been, prior to COVID-19, it was 2 nights a week. Now, what can I say that's funny? I'd say to him in the last few years, I would say, Marshall, you take the bus to the meeting on Friday night and I'll take you home. And sure enough, he'd get there by bus. And then as I'm driving him home, I would say, Marshall, what's your favorite song? You have 3 seconds. Good, okay, what's your second favorite song? And he would tell me. I said, okay, then I'd push my button on my steering wheel, I would say, hey Siri, play so-and-so song. And sure enough, 3 seconds later, his second favorite song was playing. Of course, that always amazed him because he had this big, giant CD collection. If he wanted to play a song, he had to go find the CD, etc. So a whole different change in music appreciation. Then we would go to the car hop, to IHOP. We'd go to IHOP. We'd have a breakfast at 10:30 at night. Marshall loved a breakfast at night, eggs and pancakes. And he'd get a second one for Abby, his dog, which he would share with her in the morning. So I think I've said enough. Marshall was always a part of his struggle. And I truly do miss him. I enjoyed him. I loved him. And I'm glad we're here to honor him. And thank you for listening.
I am yours, you are mine, you are what you are. You make it hard. Remember what we said and done and felt about each other. They have mercy. Don't let the past remind us of what we are not now. I am not grieving. I am yours, you are mine, you are what you are. You make it hard. Carry yourself away from me now. You are free. I am right.
Smile.
I don't know. I think that's forever. Listen for always. I am yours. You are mine. You are what you are. You make it hard. Something inside is telling me that I've got your secret. Are you still listening? Here is the lock and laughter, the key to your heart. And I love you. I am yours, you are mine, you are what you are. You make it hard, and you make it hard, and you make it hard, and you make it hard. Sunday Tuesday morning. Please be gone, I'm tired of you. What have you got to lose?